It started with a notification. Nothing unusual, just a small vibration on my phone while I was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing my coffee. The kind of sound you barely notice anymore. I almost ignored it, but something made me look, a banking alert. Transaction approved. I frowned slightly. That wasn't unusual either, except I hadn't bought anything. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. The app was already open from the notification. And there it was, a payment. Small, 42 euros, a cafe, downtown. I stared at it for a moment. Then I checked the time, 2 minutes ago. I looked up instinctively. At my kitchen, at the quiet room around me, at the cup still warm in my hand. I hadn't left the house. Not that morning. Not the night before, not for 2 days. I placed the cup down slowly. Then refreshed the app. The transaction was still there, clean, confirmed, complete. I exhaled softly. Maybe I had forgotten something. It happens. You think you stayed in, but you stepped out briefly. You paid for something without thinking. Time folds like that sometimes. I scrolled through the recent activity. Everything else looked normal. Groceries, utilities, a small pharmacy purchase from 3 days ago, all familiar, all mine. Then the notification came again. Another vibration, another alert. Transaction approved. I didn't move this time, I just looked at the screen as it appeared. A restaurant, 87 euros, timestamp, now. I felt something inside me go very still, because this time I didn't try to explain it. I opened the app again. The second transaction appeared beneath the first. Same city, same area. 2 different places, within minutes. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked outside. The street was quiet, a car passed. Someone walking a dog, normal, completely normal. I looked back at the phone, then refreshed again. Nothing new, just those 2 transactions. I opened the details of the first one. Payment method, card, physical payment, not online, not stored, used. I tightened my grip slightly. My card was in my wallet. I turned, walked to the hallway, picked it up, opened it. The card was there, exactly where it always was, untouched. I held it for a moment. Then went back to the kitchen, placed it on the table next to the phone, looked at both, side by side. The card, the transactions, both real, both confirmed, neither matching. I sat down again. Slowly, because now the question wasn't whether I had forgotten something. It was something else, something quieter, more precise. If my card was here, then what had been used? The phone vibrated again. A third notification. I didn't even look at it immediately. I just sat there, still, because I already knew. I picked up the phone, opened it. Another transaction. 112 euros. A store, same area, same pattern, same moment. I refreshed again, and that's when it happened. The balance changed, not gradually, not after a delay, immediately. As if something were happening in real time, I stared at the screen, then I saw it. A fourth transaction. Pending, still processing. The amount flickered slightly, then confirmed. I didn't breathe. Because this time I hadn't even received the notification yet. I had watched it appear. Live, I leaned forward slowly, my eyes fixed on the screen. And then it happened again, a new line. A new payment, appearing, completing, without delay, without pause, without me doing anything. I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, something colder, clearer. Because now I understood one thing. This wasn't something that had already happened. This was something that was happening. Now, I looked at the location of the last transaction. Zoomed in. Read it carefully. A clothing store. I knew that place, not well, but enough. I had passed by it before, seen it, remembered it. I stood up, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. The sound felt louder than it should have, because the room was too quiet. I picked up my phone, then my card, held both for a second, then made a decision, not emotional, not rushed, simple. I grabbed my coat, walked to the door, and paused, just for a moment, because something about this didn't feel like a mistake, didn't feel like theft. It felt organized, deliberate. As if someone wasn't just using my money, they were showing me. I opened the door, stepped outside, closed it behind me, and started walking, not fast, not slow, just steady. Because wherever this was happening, I was going to see it for myself. And as I walked, the phone vibrated again. Another transaction, another place, another confirmation. And this time, I didn't even need to look, because I already knew. Whoever was spending my money was still out there, right now. And somehow they weren't trying to hide it. I didn't call the bank, not yet. Most people would block the card, freeze everything, stop it immediately. But something about the way this was happening didn't feel like something that needed to be stopped first. It felt like something that needed to be seen. Because if I stopped it now, I would never know how it worked, or who was doing it. The phone vibrated again. I didn't check it this time, I kept walking. The streets grew busier as I moved toward the center. Shops open, people talking, the low hum of a normal afternoon, and all of it felt slightly detached. As if I were moving through something that looked real, but wasn't fully connected to me anymore. I turned onto the street where the last transaction had appeared. I recognized the storefront immediately. Glass front, neutral display, nothing unusual. I slowed down, not stopping, just observing. There were people inside, two near the entrance. A woman at the counter. Normal, nothing that stood out. My phone vibrated again. I stopped this time, took it out, looked, another payment. Same store, confirmed, seconds ago. I lifted my eyes slowly. Back to the glass, watching, because if it had just happened, then whoever was doing it was still there. I stepped closer, not rushing, just enough to see more clearly. I scanned the room, faces, movements, details, and then I saw it. Not immediately, not like a sudden realization, something quieter, a recognition near the back of the store, a man standing at the register. His back slightly turned, his posture familiar, too familiar. I didn't move, didn't blink, because something about the way he stood, the angle of his shoulders, the slight tilt of his head, it felt known, not remembered. Known. He handed something to the cashier, a bag, then reached into his pocket, pulled out a card. I leaned slightly to the side, trying to see it, but I didn't need to because the phone vibrated again. I looked down. Payment approved. Same store, same moment. I lifted my eyes back to him, and that's when he turned, not fully. Just enough for me to see his face. And for a moment, everything went quiet, because I didn't recognize him, not directly, not in the way you recognize someone you've met. But I knew his face, not from memory, from something else, something more recent. I had seen it. Somewhere, not in person, on a screen. I felt it immediately. That same cold clarity from before. Because now this wasn't just happening, it was repeating. A pattern, the same feeling, the same structure, like something I had already experienced. I took a step back, just slightly. Because I needed space to think. The man turned away again, picked up his bag, and started walking toward the exit, toward me. I didn't move, I just watched, every step, every movement, carefully. As he got closer, I saw it more clearly, the face. The expression, neutral, centered, too precise. And then it clicked, not a memory, a realization. I had seen that face in my app, not the bank. Something else, a profile, a verification image, something I had dismissed, something I hadn't questioned, until now. He reached the door, pushed it open, stepped outside, and stopped. Right in front of me. For a moment, we just stood there, facing each other. No words, no reaction. Then he looked at me directly, and for the first time something changed, not in him. In the situation, because he didn't look surprised, he didn't look confused, he looked aware, as if he had been expecting this. "You're early," he said. The sentence landed quietly. Calm. Controlled like everything else. I didn't answer immediately, because there was only one thing that mattered now. He knew who I was. I held his gaze. "Who are you?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. A small movement, almost identical to mine, too identical. "You already know," he said. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just certainty, and that's when it happened. The realization, clear, complete, because I didn't know him. But he knew me, not my name, not my face, something deeper, something structured, something that had been built. I took a slow breath. "You're using my account," I said. He shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. Another pause. Then he added, "I'm using what was assigned to me." Assigned. The word settled heavily. Because that changed everything. Not stolen, not taken, Given, I felt something tighten in my chest. "What does that mean?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment longer. Then said, "It means you're looking at this the wrong way." Silence. The street moved around us, people passing, cars, sound, life continuing, but none of it felt connected. "Then explain it," I said. He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he glanced briefly at my phone, then back at me. "You're watching it happen," he said. "Yes, and you haven't stopped it," he added. No judgment, just observation. "No," I replied. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something. "Good," he said. Good. The word didn't fit. But it was deliberate, because this wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. This was something structured, and I was now inside it, fully, completely. I held his gaze. "You shouldn't have access to that," I said. He didn't react, because that wasn't how he saw it. "I have access to what's active," he replied. Active, another word, precise, controlled. "What made it active?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped slightly to the side, creating space, not to leave, to position himself. Then he looked back at me and said something that changed everything. "You did." Silence, because that answer didn't belong, not in the way it should. I felt the structure shift again, deeper this time, more complex. Because now, this wasn't just about someone using my money. It was about something that had been set in motion. Something that required me. Something that had started with me. I looked at him carefully, because now the question wasn't who he was, it was something else. What had I done? "What do you mean I did?" I asked. My voice stayed calm, but inside something had shifted. Because his answer didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like a rule. He didn't hesitate. "You activated it," he said. Simple, clear, as if that explained everything. "It was already active," I replied. "You're using it right now." He shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "It became active when you confirmed it." Confirmed. The word stayed between us. I searched my memory, not for something obvious, for something small. A moment I hadn't questioned, a step I had taken without thinking. "When?" I asked. He looked at me for a second. Then said, "This morning." The street noise faded again, not physically, just in the way it reached me, because something about that answer was right. I had done something this morning. At the table with my phone, the notification, the first transaction. I had opened the app, refreshed it, watched, observed, confirmed. I felt it immediately, not confusion, recognition. I had acknowledged it, accepted it as real, and in doing that I had allowed it to continue. I looked back at him. "That doesn't make sense," I said. He nodded. "I know," he replied. "But it still works that way." Another pause, because now this wasn't just a situation. It was a system with rules, and I didn't know them. "You're telling me that because I saw it," I said slowly. "It continued," he finished. "Yes." Silence. I let that settle, because if that was true, then this wasn't about access. It wasn't about theft. It was about validation. Something needed to be seen to exist. I looked down at my phone, still in my hand, still active, still updating, then back at him. "And if I hadn't opened it?" I asked. He held my gaze. "It wouldn't have progressed," he said. Progressed. Another precise word. Because that meant this wasn't the beginning. This was a phase. A stage. I took a slow breath. "Then what is this?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past me for a second, at the street, at the movement around us, then back at me. "This is allocation," he said. Allocation. The word didn't belong, not here, not like this. "What's being allocated?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly again, that same movement, that same detail. "Activity," he said. I frowned slightly. "What activity?" He didn't hesitate. "Yours." The answer was immediate, certain, and completely wrong. "I'm not doing this," I said. "No," he replied. "You're not doing it." Another pause. Then he added, "But it's still yours." Silence again, because now the structure had shifted further. This wasn't about identity. It wasn't about ownership. It was about attribution. Something was being assigned to me, without my action, without my consent, but not without my involvement. I looked at him carefully. "Why you?" I asked. That question mattered more than anything else, because he wasn't random. He was specific, he was present, He was connected. He didn't react immediately. Then he said, "Because I'm the one assigned." Assigned. Again, the same structure, the same logic. Assigned by who? I asked. He smiled slightly, not amused, not mocking, just aware. "That's not something you see directly," he said. "Of course it is." I nodded slowly, because I understood something now, not everything, but enough. He wasn't controlling this. He was part of it. Just like me, in a different position, with a different role. "And what's your role?" I asked. He looked at me directly. "To execute," he said. The word landed clean, cold, precise. Because now there was no confusion left. Something was executing actions in my name. Through him, I tightened my grip slightly on the phone. "And mine?" I asked. He paused. Then answered, "To observe." Silence. Longer this time, because that explained everything. The notifications, the real-time updates, the way it unfolded in front of me. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't concealed. It was presented, for me. I looked down at the screen again. Another transaction, another confirmation, still happening, still active. Then I looked back at him. "If I stop observing," I said slowly. He nodded once. "It stops progressing," he said, progressing, not stopping, not reversing, just halting. I let that settle, because that meant one thing. Control wasn't where I thought it was. Not in the system, not in him, in me, but not in the way I expected. Not through action, through attention. I lifted my eyes again. "Why me?" I asked. This time he didn't answer immediately. He studied me, more carefully than before, as if deciding something. Then he said, "You were selected." The word felt heavier than the others. Selected. Not random, not accidental, chosen, for what? I asked. He took a small step back, creating distance, not leaving, just separating. "To see it," he said. I didn't respond. Because that answer wasn't complete. It was part of something, something larger, something I still couldn't see, but I could feel it. Because now this wasn't about money or transactions. Or even identity. This was about something else entirely, something that required a witness. And somehow that witness was me. "To see what?" I asked. The question came out quietly, not demanding. Not urgent, because I already understood something. He wasn't going to explain it the way I wanted. He looked at me for a moment longer, then said, "Not all at once." Of course, another step. Another layer. I nodded slowly. Because that fit the pattern. Everything so far had been revealed in pieces, controlled, measured. I looked down at my phone again. Another transaction had appeared. A bookstore this time, a small one. I recognized it. I had been there before once, a long time ago. I opened the details. The amount was small, 18 euros. The kind of purchase you don't question, the kind that feels personal. I looked back at him. "Why these places?" I asked. He followed my gaze to the screen, then back to me. "They're aligned," he said. "With what?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "With you," I frowned slightly. "I haven't been to that store in years," I said. He tilted his head again. "Not recently," he replied. Another pause. Then he added, "But it's still part of your pattern." Pattern. The word connected immediately. Because everything about this was structured around consistency, recognition, familiarity. "You're using my history," I said. "Yes." "And applying it now," I added. "Yes." I exhaled slowly. Because that made sense. Not emotionally, logically. If something needed to look real, it had to follow what was already known. My habits, my movements, my past, replayed, reconstructed, executed. I looked at him again. "And you're following that?" I asked. He nodded. "It's already defined," he said. Defined, not chosen, not decided, pre-existing. I stepped slightly closer, not aggressive. "Just focused." "Then you're not making decisions," I said. "No, you're following instructions," I added. "Yes." Another pause. Then I asked the question that mattered. "Where do the instructions come from?" He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he looked at my phone, then back at me. "From what's confirmed," he said. Confirmed, the same word. Again. Everything came back to that. Observation, validation, recognition. I looked down at the screen. Another transaction. A grocery store this time, a place I still used. Regularly, the amount was exact. 49 euros. That's what I usually spent, without thinking. I felt something settle into place, because now it was clear, this wasn't random. This wasn't simulation. This was replication, live. Continuous, based on me, but not controlled by me, I lifted my eyes again. If I stop confirming it, I said slowly. He nodded. It stops expanding, he replied. Expanding, not stopping. Not disappearing, just contained. I let that sit, because that meant something important. This wasn't growing on its own. It required input, my attention, my recognition. I looked at him carefully. You need me, I said. He didn't deny it. Yes. The answer was immediate, simple, clear. I felt something shift again, not outside, inside the structure. Because that changed everything. This wasn't happening to me. It was happening with me. I stepped back slightly, creating space, thinking, because now there was a way to test it. A way to see the limits. I looked down at the phone again. Another transaction appeared. A small one, a bakery, something I had passed earlier, but hadn't entered. I didn't open it. I didn't tap it. I didn't even zoom in. I just let it sit there. Unread, unconfirmed. A few seconds passed, then 10, then 20, nothing changed. The transaction remained pending, not completed, not finalized. I looked up slowly. At him. He was watching me, carefully. You see, he said. Yes, I did. I had seen it, not guessed, not assumed. Proven. I took a slow breath, then said something simple. I'm done confirming. Silence. Because that wasn't part of the pattern, not yet. He didn't move, didn't react immediately. Then he said, then it will stop progressing. Yes. Another pause. Then he added, but it won't disappear. I nodded. I know. Because now I understood the difference. Stopping growth wasn't the same as undoing what already existed. I looked at the phone again. At the list of transactions, at the version of my life that had been executed without me. Then I locked the screen, turned it off, completely, and slipped it into my pocket, not as a reaction. As a decision, I looked back at him, calm, steady. I'm not part of this anymore, I said. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded once. Then it pauses here, he said. Pause, not end. Not removal, just suspended. I turned slightly, stepping away because the conversation was over, at least for now. But before I could take a second step, he spoke again. Quietly. There's something you should know. I stopped, turned back. What? I asked. He held my gaze, and for the first time there was something different in his expression. Not control, not certainty. Something closer to warning. You weren't the first, he said. Silence. Because that sentence didn't belong to me, not directly, not personally, it belonged to something larger. I didn't respond immediately. Because I didn't need to. I already understood what it meant. This wasn't unique. This wasn't isolated. This was part of something that had already happened before. I looked at him one last time. Then what happened to them? I asked. He didn't answer. Not directly, he just said, they kept watching. And that was the only answer I needed. I didn't ask anything else, because his answer had already done something important. It had changed the scale. Until now, this had felt contained, focused on me, my account, my activity, my life. But that sentence, you weren't the first. It shifted everything outward. This wasn't a situation, it was a pattern, and patterns don't begin or end with one person, they repeat. I stood there for a moment longer, looking at him, trying to understand something beyond what he was saying, not his role, not his presence, something else, his position, because he wasn't surprised. He wasn't uncertain, he wasn't even particularly engaged. He was familiar with this, which meant he had done this before with someone else. I turned away slowly, back toward the street. Because I didn't need more answers from him, not yet. Everything I needed now was in what I had already seen. I started walking again, not fast, not slow, just steady. And this time the phone didn't vibrate. No new notifications, no new confirmations, just silence. Exactly as he had said, it had paused, but it hadn't disappeared. I could feel it. Even without looking. Because once something like that exists, you don't forget it, you don't ignore it, it stays, present, waiting. I reached my building, unlocked the door, stepped inside. The hallway was quiet. Empty, the same as always, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Because now I was aware of something I hadn't been before, not just what had happened, but what could happen. I entered my apartment, closed the door behind me, and this time I locked it immediately, not out of fear, out of clarity, because whatever this was, it didn't need to enter. It was already here. I walked into the kitchen, set my keys down, then took out my phone, held it for a moment, then placed it face down on the table, not opening it, not checking it, because that mattered. Observation. Confirmation, that was the mechanism, and I had stopped it. For now, I sat down slowly. The room was quiet, too quiet, because before silence meant nothing. Now it meant control. Or the absence of it. I looked around, at the familiar details. The table, the chair, the cup I had left earlier, everything still in place, still mine, but I couldn't shake the feeling. That something had already moved beyond the space. Something that didn't need to be here physically, because it existed somewhere else. In a system, in a structure, in something I couldn't see. I reached for the notebook, opened it, and wrote, Day 1 activity observed and confirmed. I paused, then added, Day 1 activity paused by disengagement. Another pause, then one more line. Pattern not unique. I closed the notebook, because that was the part that mattered most, not what had happened, that it had happened before. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence settle. Then I stood up again, walked to the window, looked outside. The street moved as usual, people passing, cars driving, life continuing, nothing unusual, nothing visible, but I knew better now. Because something like this doesn't announce itself. It unfolds, quietly, gradually, until you notice it, and once you do, you become part of it. I turned back toward the room, toward the phone. Still face down on the table, still silent. Then I did something simple. I walked over, picked it up, turned it on, not opening the app, not checking anything, just holding it. Because I needed to know something, not from him, not from the system, from myself. I took a breath, then opened the banking app again. The screen loaded. The transactions were still there. Every one of them. Frozen, exactly where they had been. No changes, no updates, no progression. I scrolled slowly, reading them again, carefully, looking for something, anything, and then I saw it. Not a new transaction, not a change, something small at the top of the screen, a line I hadn't noticed before, a status, subtle, almost invisible. Active session, 2 users. I stared at it. Because that didn't fit, not at all. I was the only one logged in. I had always been the only one. There was no shared access, no second account, no authorization, and yet there it was, clear. Simple, unmistakable, 2 users. I felt something settle inside me, not fear, not confusion, understanding. Because now, even without confirming anything, even without interacting, it was still there, still connected, still present. I lifted my eyes slowly, looking around the room, at the empty space, at the silence, and for the first time, I asked a different question, not where he was, not what he was doing, but something else. If I wasn't confirming anymore, then who was? I didn't close the app, I didn't move, I just stared at that line. Active session, 2 users. It didn't flicker, it didn't change, it remained there. Stable, certain. As if it had always been there, and I had simply never noticed. I lowered the phone slowly, then placed it back on the table, face up this time. Because now, not looking at it wasn't the same as not being part of it. I walked away, back into the living room, sat down, and stayed there, still, thinking. Because this changed something fundamental. I had stopped confirming, I had stopped observing actively, and yet the system still recognized 2 participants, which meant one thing. It didn't rely on me alone. There was another point of confirmation, another source of validation, and if that source existed, then the process could continue, even without me. I leaned back slightly, closing my eyes for a moment, not to rest, to organize, because now I had 2 facts. 1, my observation had initiated the progression. 2, my disengagement had paused it. But not completely, not fully. Something else remained active, something else was still connected. I opened my eyes again, slowly, because now the question wasn't whether it would continue. It was how I stood up, walked back into the kitchen, picked up the phone again, looked at the screen, still the same, still 2 users. I tapped into the session details, not expecting much. But something was there. A second device. Listed, active, no name, no location, just a connection, stable, continuous. I stared at it, because that meant he was still connected. The man from the street, the one executing, but that wasn't the part that mattered. The part that mattered was this: if I wasn't confirming, then how was the session still active? I scrolled further, looking for something, anything, and then I saw it, a small indicator, next to the second session. Primary activity source. I felt something shift, because that wasn't me. Not anymore. I hadn't interacted, I hadn't confirmed, and yet the system still considered activity primary. I took a slow breath, then stepped back slightly, because now the structure was clearer. There were roles, defined, separated: observer, executor, and something else. Something that held priority, something that drove the process forward, even without my input. I turned away from the phone again, because I didn't need to look at it to understand. I already knew where to look instead. The door. I walked toward it. Slowly. Because the answer wasn't in the system. It was here, in my space, in my access, in what had already been established. I opened the door. The hallway was empty, quiet, nothing unusual. But I didn't expect to see anything, because this wasn't visible like that. I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and listened. Nothing, just the faint sound of distant movement, a neighbor. A door closing somewhere far down the hall. Normal, everything normal. But now normal didn't mean safe. I walked down the hallway, slowly, past the other doors, each one closed, each one silent. Until I reached the end, where the stairwell opened. I stopped there, not because I heard something, because I felt something, a presence, not physical, not immediate, but connected, like a line. Running through this space, from my apartment to somewhere else. I turned back, walked toward my door again, and as I got closer I saw it, not obvious, not at first glance, something small. Placed near the frame, at eye level, a mark, subtle, almost invisible. I stepped closer, looked carefully, and then I understood. It wasn't a mark, it was a device. Thin, flat, attached to the frame. Blending in, I reached toward it, then stopped, because touching it would change something, would confirm something, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. I stepped back, slowly. Because now there was no question left. The second user wasn't somewhere else. He wasn't just connected through the system, he was connected here, through this, through access, through presence. I turned, walked back inside, closed the door carefully, and locked it again. Then I leaned against it, not out of fear, out of understanding, because now the structure was complete: observer, executor, and source. 3 roles, 3 connections, 3 points of confirmation, and I was no longer the primary one. I walked back into the kitchen, looked at the phone again, still active. Still connected, still 2 users, but now I knew. There was a third presence, not listed, not visible, but driving everything. And that meant one thing. This wasn't something I could stop just by looking away. Because even without me, it had already found another way. I didn't touch the device on the door. Not yet. Because now I understood something important. This wasn't built to react to panic. It was built to react to confirmation. Every action mattered, every movement, every decision, so I did nothing. I walked back into the kitchen, sat down, and looked at the phone again. Active session, 2 users. Still there, still unchanged. I tapped into the session details once more. The second device remained active, stable, but now I knew that wasn't the full picture. There was something else, something not listed, something outside the visible structure. I leaned back slowly. Thinking, because now I had seen all 3 layers: me, the executor, and the source. And the source was physical, close, inside my environment. I stood up again, walked toward the door. Stopped just before it, looked at the device again. Thin, discreet, placed precisely where it needed to be, not random, not temporary, installed. That meant planning, access, time. I didn't reach for it, instead I stepped back. Because removing it wasn't the first step. Understanding it was. I turned back toward the kitchen, picked up the phone, opened the app again. And this time, I didn't look at the transactions, I looked at the session. Specifically, the timing, the activity logs, every interaction, every update. And then I saw it, a pattern. Not in the transactions, in the confirmations. Every time something progressed, there was a signal, small, barely noticeable, a micro delay, a confirmation tick, not tied to me. Not tied to the executor, something else, something external. I watched the screen, waited, nothing moved. Of course not, because I wasn't interacting. The executor wasn't progressing. Everything was paused, but the session remained. Active, waiting, I stepped closer to the door again, slowly. And this time I paid attention, not to the device itself, to the space around it. To the silence, and then I heard it, faint, almost nothing, a soft pulse, a signal, regular, consistent. The device wasn't just attached, it was active, communicating. I stood still, listening. Counting every few seconds, another pulse, another confirmation. I stepped back again because now I understood, that was the source. The third point, not observing, not executing, confirming. Feeding the system, maintaining the structure. Even when I didn't, even when the executor paused, the source remained. I walked back into the kitchen, placed the phone down. Then took out the notebook again, opened it, and wrote, Day 1, third confirmation source identified. I paused, then added, physical relay present at entry point. Another pause. Then one more line. System remains active without observer input. I closed the notebook, because now the structure was complete, fully visible. And once something is fully visible, it can be addressed. I looked at the phone again, then back at the door, then back at the phone, because now there was only one step left, not to observe. Not to disengage, to break the chain. I picked up the phone, opened the app, and did something I hadn't done before. I initiated a manual override, not to block the card. Not to cancel the transactions. Something deeper. Session termination. The option was there, hidden, not immediate, but accessible. I hovered over it for a moment, because this mattered. This would end it or force it to react. I took a slow breath, then pressed it. The screen paused, processing, waiting, then the phone vibrated sharply, not a notification. A call, unknown number. Immediate, I answered. Yes, silence, then a voice, not the man from before, different, lower, calmer. You're interfering with an active process, it said. No greeting, no introduction. Just statement. I held the phone steady. Yes, I replied. A pause, then, you were not meant to terminate the session. Not meant. Another rule, another structure. I am part of the session, I said. Yes. Then I can end it, I added. Silence. Longer this time, because that wasn't expected. Then the voice replied, not without consequence. I didn't react. Because that didn't matter anymore. What consequence? I asked. Another pause, then the structure collapses. I looked at the screen, still processing, still not completed. Then I asked the only question that mattered. What structure? I said. Silence. Then the voice answered. The one you're inside. And that was the moment everything became clear. Not just the system, not just the roles, the purpose. I tightened my grip slightly on the phone, then said, good, and I ended the call. At the same time, the screen changed. Session terminated. The transactions froze. The session disappeared. The second user disconnected, and for the first time since it began, everything stopped. Completely, I stood there, still. Looking at the phone, then at the door, because now there was only one thing left. I walked slowly toward it, reached out, and this time I removed the device. No hesitation, no pause. Just a single movement, clean, final. The pulse stopped. The silence returned, and just like that the structure was gone. The silence felt different, not empty, not heavy, complete. I stood there for a moment, the small device still in my hand, looking at something that had been part of my space without my knowledge. Light, simple, unremarkable. And yet everything had depended on it. I turned it over once. Carefully, no markings, no identification, nothing that explained where it came from or who had placed it. I didn't try to find out. Not immediately, because that was what mattered anymore. What mattered was that it was no longer there. I walked back into the kitchen, placed it on the table, next to the phone. Then I sat down. Slowly, because now the movement was over, the structure had ended. Not paused, not suspended. Ended, I picked up the phone again, opened the app. No session. No second user, no activity. Just my account, clean, still, mine. The transactions remained listed, frozen in place. But they no longer felt active. They felt historical, like something that had happened. Not something that was happening. I scrolled through them once more, carefully. Each one aligned, each one familiar, each one built from something that belonged to me, but no longer connected. No longer expanding, I locked the phone, placed it down, then leaned back in my chair, and let the silence settle. No vibration, no notifications, no movement, just space, real space. I reached for the notebook again, opened it, turned to a new page, and wrote, "Final session terminated." I paused, then added, "Execution chain broken." Another pause, then one more line. "Source removed." I closed the notebook, because that was enough. There was nothing left to document, nothing left to observe. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked outside. The street was the same. People passing, cars moving, everything normal, as if nothing had happened. And maybe for everyone else nothing had, but for me, something had existed. Something structured, something precise, something that had required me to see it to continue, and once I stopped seeing it, it stopped existing. I turned away from the window. Walked back into the room, and for the first time, I didn't look at the phone, I didn't check anything. I didn't wait for something to happen, because nothing would, not anymore. I picked up the small device one last time, walked to the trash, and dropped it in. No hesitation, no second thought, because whatever it had been connected to was no longer connected to me. I returned to the table, sat down, and rested my hands in front of me, steady, present, uninterrupted. Then I closed my eyes for a moment, not to think, not to analyze, just to be still. Because now I understood something simple. This had never been about money, or identity, or access. It had been about attention, about what I chose to see, and what I chose not to. Because once something depends on your observation, you are part of it. And once you step out, it has nothing left to hold on to. I opened my eyes again. The room was quiet, exactly as it should be. And this time, it stayed that way.